And we're live. Um, Welcome everybody to a very impromptu conversation with Nastya, who is on the streets in Kyiv, where there is significant protests going on, and it's not about the war, and it's not. I gotta say, it's not. This is not. This is a self-inflicted Ukrainian wound. Not. We can't.
Completely.
We can't blame this one on Vladimir Putin. Um, but it has weird, like, American resonances. Nasia, why are people
Actually, a
taking?
lot now that I think about it.
Oh yeah. Why are people taking to the streets? And tell us what's going on, or show us what's going on.
Okay. You're waiting for me, and I don't know if I'm
Yeah, you're breaking up now. Wherever you were standing before was working better. So there is an internet outage in Kiev, in the downtown area, which may or may not be related to the protests. I'm not sure, and I don't want to speculate about it. But Nastya is having a little bit of trouble finding a space where she can join us from. And we're going to give her a moment to rejoin and try to find out what's going on. For background, I can give you the high altitude. There are two law enforcement slash anti-corruption agencies that were independent of the presidency, and because of Ukraine's history of corruption, anti-corruption issues are a very big deal, and are of very high political salience issue for a lot of people. And yesterday, the parliament voted and the president signed a bill that would take away their independence and make them report to the prosecutor general, which in an American context would be, of course, very typical, right? So the attorney general supervises federal anti-corruption issues here, and we have no expectation that they would be generally independent of the president. But in Ukraine, this is a substantially uh, um, uh, uh, first of all, there isn't the same unitary executive. And the idea that President Zelensky wants to bring the anti corruption units under presidential control is seen uh, as a an assault on an important democratic institution, and was opposed by a lot of people and is now provoking protests. Really, the first anti government street protests that we've seen since the full scale invasion began. So think of this as a kind of continuation of some of the political energy associated with the Euromaidan from 2014. And there's a lot of anger that is maybe a little bit hard for Americans to understand because again, in our system, what Zelensky has done is would be the norm anyway, right? But it is produced a lot of anger in the Ukrainian context, and uh, street protests of the sort that, again, that we really haven't seen in quite a while. So that is what I know about the subject. And again, this bill was passed and signed yesterday, and there were protests yesterday, and there are again protests today. Nastya is joining us from the periphery of those protests and is again having trouble with an internet connection, which was working fine just before we went live, and of course died as soon as we went live. So that is uh, uh, where we are, and I'm going to give her another few minutes to find a place, and then if she cannot find a place that will work downtown, we will reconvene a bit later in the afternoon when she is at a place with stable internet. Um, so, Nastya, if you can hear me, um, uh, send me some sign by other means, text or whatever, that of your status. And otherwise, I will just curtail this, and we will reconvene it when you are in a place with stable internet. Wait, we may have Nastya. There she is.
I'm sorry. I walked even further away from the protest. Were you live this whole time?
We were live this whole time. I the background,
I'm
and
sorry.
and I
Okay.
exhausted literally everything I know, and then you came back right on time.
Okay.
So
How
uh,
is my audio? Is it okay?
your audio is okay. What I would say is
Excellent.
talking, because right where you are is fine. Um,
Excellent.
um,
Okay.
so um,
Sit over
let
there.
let's talk about what this bill is, and first of all, explain to Americans where, we don't have an independent anti-corruption unit. It's just part of the Justice Department. Um,
Right.
why is the idea that the anti-corruption forces um, uh, would would go to would report to the prosecutor general? Why is that offensive enough to bring people out into the streets?
Yeah, so somebody probably just connected and they're asking in the comments like what are the protests about? Let me give like an elevator pitch. So yesterday, we saw basically mass protests essentially for the first time since Russia's full-scale invasion. And they happened because the Ukrainian government passed a bill and then Zelensky signed it into law that subjugates two of Ukraine's key anti-corruption bodies to the office of the general prosecutor. And so it's of course.
I can hear you.
Oh, okay, okay. There's like a million bikers going on the roads, and it's really loud. Okay, so to explain why this matters and why it caused like the first protests in years. So Ukraine had a revolution of dignity in 2014, which, if you care about Ukraine, you probably have heard of that. It was this, very pivotal moment in the country's history. It basically split everything into before and after the year Maidan. And as a direct sort of consequence of that revolution, Ukraine passed a bunch of important reforms with the help of, money and advisors from the West, from the European Union, from the US as well. And so one of the main achievements and one of the main reforms is the anti-corruption reform. It's the reform that establishes a whole network of independent anti-corruption bodies that didn't exist before. It essentially creates like a parallel structure of government in a way. So there are four bodies. There is the body called NABU, that's how we refer to it. It's like a specialized anti-corruption bureau that does pre-trial investigations. So it investigates all the top officials that engage in corruption. Then there is SAP, that's the specialized like anti-corruption prosecutor's office that then takes NABU's pre-trial investigations and sort of takes it to court. Then there is a specialized anti-corruption high court And then there's also an agency that doesn't really do investigations, but it's a national agency in corruption prevention. It tracks asset declarations and sort of like looks into the assets of various high profile people to make sure they don't have random like undeclared villa in Spain that costs $100 million. Um, and so those four bodies were created after Euromaidan, and for the Ukrainian society, you know, that structure is extremely important and sort of symbolic of the achievements of the Euromaidan. You know, around 100 people died in that revolution because of the government's crackdown. The whole thing is a very sensitive subject because, you know, Russia invaded right after the Euromaidan. And so essentially, the government passed a law that said that those two bodies, NABU, that does investigations, and SUP, that helps with investigations and then takes the cases to court, that those two bodies are now essentially going to be subjugated to the office of the general prosecutor, who is a presidential political appointee. And in the history of Ukraine, we've never really had a good general prosecutor. Like they've always been people loyal to the president. They've always been sort of shady officials who did shady stuff, and they've never been trusted by the civil society or by the society. Um, and so that's why people reacted, because, you know, essentially the law kills the independence of those two anti-corruption bodies. And the way this bill was passed and just like the way that it happened, which we can get into if you want, it all looked super bad and really shady and terrible. And it's also not the first bad thing that happened in terms of like Zelensky attacking the anti-corruption ecosystem in Ukraine in the past few weeks. So the whole
Yeah,
thing is really worrying.
let's zoom back a minute because the context in which it happens is an important one. A couple of weeks ago, there was a raid on a one of the leading anti-corruption figures. This doesn't come out of nowhere. So what happened, and why are people looking askance at what Zelensky is doing in the anti-corruption space?
Yeah, so in the past few weeks, there has been a sort of an escalating kind of standoff. Let me put in another AirPod. Sort of the standoff between Zelensky and the anti-corruption ecosystem in Ukraine. So there were raids at the premises and at the home of a prominent anti-corruption activist, Vitaly Shabunin. Then there were also and Shabunin was charged with fraud and evading military service, even though he's a current member of the military and he is currently serving in the army. And his team and other activists said that the charges are completely bogus. He says that, you know, him and his team say that the charges are essentially a politically motivated vendetta for all of his anti-corruption work that he's done. You know, sort of shining light on the corruption of Zelensky's friends and people in Zelensky's circles. And then after that, there were also mass searches at the premises of NABU, one of those four anti-corruption bodies that was affected by this bill, and SUP as well. So there were mass searches at the offices and premises sort of related to the people that work at SUP and NABU. And that was seen as I don't think anyone really saw that as a legitimate sort of just government doing its job. I think most people saw it as, you know, the old guard of the Ukrainian law enforcement, like the agencies that were there, like the dependent agencies, right? The non-independent agencies, like the SBU, the State Security Service, and others, that they are having sort of like a standoff with the new guard, the post-Maidan agencies, and they're coming at them. And the official reason that the government gives, that Zelensky gives, and you know, his authorities, is that there are Russian agents in NABU and SUP, and they have to clear these agencies of the Russian influence. And, you know, if you really want to do that, you don't dismantle the independence of the agency. You know, you don't subjugate the agency to the prosecutor that you appointed. That like that doesn't really solve the issue at all. And all of this reminds me so much of what's happening in the US, Ben, which, maybe it's not the perfect analogy, but it's kind of like, you go after these institutions, you say that it's because, they're all pro leftist agenda, whatever. And then you do a bunch of stuff that has nothing to do with the leftist agenda that you're trying to uncover. And you just end up destroying the institution. So you just do a bunch of unnecessary hurt.
All right. So tell us a little bit about. So I want to come back to in the American system, the idea that your anti corruption prosecutors would report to the attorney general is it's not merely not offensive, it's intuitive, right? The
Right.
public integrity section of the Justice Department, until Pam Bondi dismantled it, did report to the Attorney General, and Americans don't look at that as and all the U.S. attorneys report, to the president. But so talk a little bit about why the independence of these agencies is such a critical component of Ukrainian understanding of its own democracy. Um, like if we did this, people would be like, yeah, the attorney general gets to appoint the public corruption people. Um, uh, it has a very there would not be demonstrations in Washington over this, much less large scale ones. Why talk a little bit about why this really harkens back to the pre-Euromaidan environment?
Well, it's really because in order to go after top Ukrainian officials who commit crimes and who engage in corruption, you can't also be subordinate to those officials, right? So if you're an agency that wants to take on people in the president's office, you can't report that to the president's office. And so that's why people are mad right now, because the whole idea of those four agencies that were created after Euromaidan was that they were going to be independent of government so that they can take on criminals in the government, right? And the Ukrainian society has very trust when it comes to corruption in its government. And so this is seen as a direct threat. I mean, I can't even overstate just how bad this move was received. I mean, the Ukrainian civil society has called this a black day in the history of Ukraine. The prominent journalists and activists say that Zelensky essentially, by passing and signing this bill, just erased 10 years, like a decade of post-revolution progress in Ukraine and reverted Ukraine back to pre-revolution times, which is surreal because you know, and this gets sort of like at these larger dynamics of this protest here that are ongoing right now. That people like me, right? Like I'm 24, I'm very young. The vast majority of people who just saw that protest in the president's office, they're my peers, or they're people a bit older than me. But the vast majority of them are people who either were, 17, 18, very young, coming of age during the Revolution of Dignity, or they were kids like me during the Revolution of Dignity. And so I grew up only knowing one reality. I never knew the pro Russian Ukraine. I don't remember the times of Yanukovych. The only reality that I remember, and the only sort of expectation I have from my government, is that we are going in the direction of joining the European Union, joining NATO. It's literally inscribed in our constitution, by the way. That was another huge achievement of the Euromaidan moment, that the post-revolution government enshrined in our constitution Ukraine's ambitions to join EU and NATO. And building of all of these institutions was directly tied to our ascension to the EU, which is another huge problem, right? So, Ukraine, for example, Ukraine got a visa-free regime a few years ago, and that was explicitly tied to the success of us establishing those institutions, right? So all of these reforms were extremely important, and all of the young people in this country, like me, we grew up with a certain social contract. And the social contract was that the government can make mistakes, There can be corruption. There can be whatever problems there may be. But the one bright, the brightest of all red lines is Ukraine's European and Western future, because that was the pivotal moment of the revolution. And everyone sort of treated that as this pillar of what it means to be Ukrainian. And so by dismantling the independence of these two anti-corruption agencies, Zelensky effectively broke that social contract, because that directly threatens Ukraine's future in the EU. And the European officials reacted to that immediately. Several hours after the bill was passed yesterday, European officials were already literally calling the Ukrainian government, being like, what the hell is going on? And tweeting that, the EU Commissioner for Enlargement, for example, said that, she had frank discussions with members of our government and said that she was seriously concerned about what was going on. And a bunch of European officials have since also voiced such concerns. And so to people like me and to everyone who's, took an active part in the revolution, it feels like, a spit in the face. Like, all of those efforts were in vain. And you see that even at the posters. Like, there are some people who were at the revolution in 2014 now protesting, being like, I can't believe I have to do this shit again. That's like an actual quote in people's posters. And some other posters
I
say,
saw one
we've
that said,
all
tired of making posters.
yeah, I know. People are like, we've had this shit before. Why are we doing this again? Like, we've already decided that this is what our country is going to be. And so it's really this pivotal moment that's threatening Ukraine's European future. The
So,
end. Yeah.
so talk to me about what Zelensky is thinking, because uh,
I wish I knew.
so he has a huge amount of goodwill from the West. He's just settled down his relationship with Donald Trump. He's got, all of Europe wants to send him money and weapons. And he's finally got the Trump administration under control. Why is this a good moment for him to spaz out in authoritarianism at home? And, Marjorie Taylor Greene is like, see, I told you, Zelensky is a dictator. What I mean, this is not it's not a good look. What how do you understand what the president's office is thinking here?
So there are a few factors. And, we will never know what's actually going through his head. But there are several factors. One is the president's office and Zelensky himself and people around him. They genuinely have an authoritarian, corrupt side to them. And, I'm a bit tired of people in the West being shocked when I say this. I've actually had arguments with foreigners who would tell me, like, you got to give him some space and credit. The man is a president at war. Like, I know, but it is true, and every Ukrainian knows this, that the power is essentially entirely concentrated in the president's office. So Volodymyr Zelensky and his chief of staff, Andriy Yermak, decides virtually everything that goes on everywhere in all parts of the government. It's really similar to what's going on in the US. Like, it's extremely similar. Our parliament does whatever the president tells it to do. It's even worse than your Congress, because at least half of your Congress are normal people. In our case, it's a
Well,
tiny majority that's
it's a unicameral.
yeah.
There
Yeah,
aren't,
yeah.
so it's
We
easier
don't
to.
have that. Yes. But our parliament doesn't have any power to do anything right now. They do just whatever Zelensky tells them to do. All of the ministries operate according to Zelensky and Yermak's will. All of the ministers who had those ministries are appointees that are close to Yermak and are loyal to Yermak. And so this is a real thing. Like, I'm not, this is just the reality in Ukraine. And it goes far beyond just the wartime necessary screws, or you have to have some, what is it called? Censorship because it's wartime. I understand all of that. We've been living with this reality for years. It has gone way too far. in Zelensky's space. Everyone knows this. And so that's one. So Zelensky has that side of him, and he wants to protect his circle from investigations because just roughly a month ago, NABU, one of the agencies that is being targeted right now, went after the deputy prime minister of Ukraine, Chernyshov, who is Zelensky's friend. And the president's office was reportedly kind of completely shocked about the investigation. They didn't know because NABU was acting in an independent manner. And so that created problems because, I mean, the guy is the deputy prime minister of Ukraine. Nominally, it's one of the most powerful jobs in the country. And there have been many cases like that where these anti-corruption institutions are going after people in Zelensky's circle. Zelensky doesn't like it, and that's why he's going after them right now. That's one. But another very, very
So a suggestion that Zelensky himself is corrupt, or is this more as Ulysses S. Grant, where it doesn't totally, but there are a lot of dirty people around.
So this is a good question. There haven't really been any investigations that would show that, Zelensky himself and his family are enriching themselves in some way. Like we haven't seen some, Olena Zelensky, his wife, buying suddenly a villa in France or something. Like that hasn't happened. What has happened is that there have been a lot of investigations about corruption and illegal enrichment and abuse of power of people around him, people in his immediate circle, people that he's friends with, people that he has appointed, and gave them power. And, what then happens is that those people miraculously escape prosecution. Well, that's not a coincidence. So all of this stuff happened on Zelensky's watch. And the problem is that he's not doing anything about it. He isn't punishing the corrupt officials for his friends. He's letting them escape justice. And so, the civil society sort of arrives at this conclusion that he's totally he totally deserves the blame to be on him as an individual because he is empowered to stop this and he's doing nothing. He's only making it worse, essentially.
Before
But
the protests themselves, and I want to wrap up
I
short.
think there was another one very important quick thing that I had to say about why Zelensky is doing this. Another reason for why it's happening right now is because for years the US and Europe, but I think mainly the US, played a huge role in making sure that Ukraine's anti-corruption bodies functioned as normal. Because the US, had an interest in making sure that Ukraine was a prosperous, democracy. And so the institutions were established years ago with a lot of American money and, sort of, tagging along and pressure, I guess, that we have to get it done. And Europe as well was, European diplomats were constantly keeping watch on the individual cases that these agencies were handling, the directors who were being appointed to those agencies. So the West had an interest in keeping the Ukrainian government in check. And now that's no longer really happening because Europe, it's kind of awkward, right? Because we are at war and we're victims and Europe has to help us. So it's not really the time to kind of call us out on all of this stuff. And they're kind of scared to do it. And then the US just doesn't give a crap anymore.
Right.
And so
when U.S. administration hears the word corruption, it translates it, the Ukrainian word for corruption, to the English word is deals. And it just wants
yes. Yeah. So, so we don't have American ambassadors talking to Zelensky people being like, guys, we're going to cut you, we're going to stop sending you money or we're going to punish you in some way if you don't get your shit straight. Nobody is doing that anymore. I mean, some are, but it's definitely not to the same extent as it was in the Biden era. Biden was very actively, and his administration was very actively involved in making sure that these anti-corruption agencies worked well. And when the US sort of withdrew from that role, it's now falling apart. And Zelensky feels, and his administration feels, that they have, certain level of impunity here.
All right. So tell us about the protests themselves. Are these a few scattered 24-year-olds with signs, or is this a how big are they?
So today, the protests are happening in at least 17 cities. So this is big places like Kyiv, Lviv, Dnipro, Kharkiv, like all of the main Ukrainian cities, but also a bunch of smaller towns as well. Um, from my experience, I mean, I was there at the protest just 30 minutes ago, but there was no internet there. I don't know what that's about, but a lot of it is very young people, but not exclusively. And it's
How
a big crowd.
tens
Sorry?
of people? Are we talking tens of people, hundreds of people, thousands of people?
We're talking thousands of people. We're talking thousands of people, definitely.
Mhm.
Uh, the protests yesterday, people estimated, I wasn't at that one, the first one, unfortunately. The protest yesterday was a few thousand. And from what I saw when I was there just an hour ago, it looks like a much bigger crowd. And I'm sitting not far from the protest epicenter right now, and I just like for an hour I keep seeing streams of people pouring in. So it's a pretty big crowd, and most of these are young people, which is kind of what a lot of people pointed out, that's what makes it so impressive, because this isn't a protest about some activist who's popular and who's being prosecuted. It's not about some personality that people are drawn to. It's about very sort of niche and complicated bureaucratic
Right.
legal institutions.
It's not about what
And
have an anti-corruption prosecutor and invest.
yeah,
It's a reporting mechanism and the org.
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah. So
so
and so
um,
the last remark is also like a lot of us were kids when these bodies were established. Like I didn't grow up thinking about Nabo and stuff, in my youth, and so did like the rest of the people there. And that's what makes it even crazier that they're all showing up.
okay, so uh, somebody just shared in the chat that Ukrainskaya Pravda just reported that Zelensky has promised to submit a bill preserving the independence of these agencies, having just submitted a bill taking it away. What do we know about that, if anything?
Yeah, so the government's communication on this was just, I mean, ludicrous. They passed this bill with like in a very shady, non-communicative way. Nobody explained anything to the society. And then Zelensky last night, I think like in the middle of the night at 2:30 a.m., uh, posted a statement saying that, we have to clear these agencies of Russian influence, which is funny because like his lawmakers who voted for it were only able to pass that law because a bunch of pro-Russian lawmakers who are still in our parliament, thanks to the government, voted with them in a coalition. So, if you want to talk about clearing some agency or some body of Russian influence, they should start with the freaking parliament. But anyway, the Zelensky was like, this is not a big deal. There are going to be independent institutions. This is important for our future. I understand this. We just have to clear them of Russian agents. And, it was sort of like a very short, dry statement. Then this morning, people are still talking about it. It's escalating. People are getting more and more mad. He posts another statement saying that he has had meetings, and he posts a picture. He's had meetings with the directors of these two agencies and a bunch of other law enforcement officials. And he has assured them that the independence is going to be preserved, that, nothing bad is going to happen. We're all going to work together in unison to, counter corruption. And like nobody fell for it because the corruption in question is of his people. Who's going to believe that Zelensky is going to allow them to be prosecuted? Nobody, because he's never done it before. He's done the opposite. And then he then also said that he tasked the parliament with, passing a new law that is going to ensure the independence of these bodies, which, I mean, like if you just think about it, it makes zero sense. You just passed a law that
In a
kills
way,
that independence. And yeah, like, what are you going to do now? Like, So all of it is a charade, really, and like nobody's buying it. If people bought it, there wouldn't be thousands of people in front of me right now. So he's just trying to save face because the Europeans are putting pressure on him. People are putting pressure on him. But I don't. Nobody. I mean, nobody believes in this anymore because last night, really, for many people, was a point of no return. I mean, people were comparing Zelensky to Yanukovych. It was. I mean, I just can't overestimate how badly everyone took it. So I don't think any statement is going to save him at this point, unless he reverses that law completely. But even then, as I've said, the social contract is broken and the trust is gone. So
So we are going to leave it there. Nastya, stay safe, and let's we will reconvene if anything happens further. Thanks to you all for joining us. Nastya is now frozen, and so I think that's a good time to leave off. Steve asks, can Zelensky release the Epstein files? And I think that's an excellent suggestion. And I'm going to steal it and post it on Blue Sky. Uh, Thanks for joining us. You are all great Americans, great Ukrainians, and great others. And we'll see you soon.